All right, welcome back, everyone. Pumping out another video a little bit faster than expected, but that's good news for everyone interested. I figured this time around we'd talk more on the trace tool here on the right side of our tool panel. I talked about it a little bit in my Tools of Silhouette Studio video, but I've had enough questions and concerns on it. I wanted to make a separate video with no other distractions. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is this trace tool here on the right. I'm still not sure what that icon is supposed to be. Some people call it toast. I've heard it called a butterfly. Whatever it's supposed to be, the important thing is that's what we need today. And you'll see at the top it says trace. So if you're ever confused, you can kind of cursor over and wait, and it'll tell you this opens the image effects panel. This one, I don't know if it'll tell us since it's already selected, but once you've clicked on it, it'll tell you what that panel is at the top. So image effects, the fill panel, things like that. So this video today will be about trace. So that way I'm not jumping on and off my screen to my other monitor. I've imported a couple of images. These are just straight Google images. No PNGs or anything special this time around, no SVGs. Just your typical JPEG image downloaded from Google. I don't own any of these, and I'm not doing anything specific with them. They will just be for the video for educational purposes. But I got a variety of styles to show off a couple different features with the trace tool. So starting first, I'm just going to do our simple black and white little image here. Zoom back in. This is ideally what you're looking for when using trace. It doesn't matter how complicated the image is, but ideally black and white. Grayscale can work, but we'll talk about in a second why it can be a little more difficult. So when you can find it for your project, even if you want it colored, this is what we're ideally looking for, some kind of black and white image. Keywords that work well are things like silhouette, where you can get kind of like a black outline type. You can do coloring book or coloring page is a good like keyword for this type of drawing, or even just vector in addition to whatever you're looking for, so like Hello Kitty vector, Hello Kitty coloring page for this black and white style. So with that, let's use this as our first example. And we'll use our trace panel here. Like I mentioned in the previous video, even in the free version of Silhouette Studio, you'll get this first tab with our basic trace options. And then if you pay for an upgrade, I believe it's any of the upgrades. I have the business version myself, which is top. So I definitely have it. I believe it's every version though, but don't quote me on it. I believe so. That you get the trace by color and some other special options. So with the regular trace first for everybody, regardless of your version, you can select trace area, which you'll see our cursor changed from our normal, in my case, kind of purpley pink arrow to this new icon, which tells us we're going to be drawing out our trace area. So everything within this area is going to be attempted to be traced. You can change the size of the trace area if maybe you drew it too big or too small. Or maybe you're trying to focus more on like just her head in this case. Maybe you want to block out some of this unnecessary stuff, so there's less editing and cleanup needed. So in this case, I'm just going to do the whole thing for this video. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit so that we can get a better look at her. I think it's a her. She's got a bow. I think it officially said it wasn't a girl, but that's all right. We're going with her on this one. Voice. And you'll see that it's kind of filled in this area with yellow. Everything that's yellow is what the software is going to treat as a traced area. And you'll get a kind of cut line around everything that is currently highlighted in yellow. This threshold selection right here is where the grayscale images can be a little more difficult. This is just determining what range of contrast the trace is going to pick up. And since this is just a standard JPEG, you can see that there's some fuzziness in the color out here. It's black and white, as we saw, but you've got the extra pixels and pixelation out here that go into different gray tones. And so sometimes it looks like there's more black kind of outside of our trace area in different locations. And so as you bring this threshold up, it's going to expand that trace area to cover more and more of the gray tones until it's obviously way too much. And the lower you bring it, the less and less of those blacks and grays it will see, again, until you get down to 0% where it's picking up nothing. So it's kind of a balancing act because we are using what is ultimately a blurry photo. This picture came in very small, about a 1-inch thumbnail, and there's a lot of pixelation. So I want to bring it up high enough that we get a relatively smooth image, but not being so high that it looks blobby and ugly like this. So it's kind of a balancing act, and just looking for certain things, maybe areas like this, where it looks a little sunken in, so I might go up a couple and see if I can smooth it out, and then take a look at our image as a whole, and see if we're looking fairly close to what we're after. I'm seeing this area here being a little close for what I would normally want. So I might back it down just a couple, just so we get a little cleaner of an edge where nothing is being lost. So we might get a little smaller line here, and that will be ultimately be our outline, but we won't get as much ugliness over here. And then I haven't seen it talked about much in other videos. People just tend to kind of skip over it, but this scale I have found is fairly important. That this scale determines how big this scale, you can see this is very ugly, how big this scale is in the trace. So the like stair step effect is obviously not great currently. So I always bring this down to the bottom, which usually is 4, I don't know if it's 4 or 4%, but either way it'll say 4 here. You can see I can't go any lower. And that's really crispened up the edges quite a bit compared to, I think it's at either 10 or 12 is where it starts. And you've got a lot more of that kind of pixelation and jagged edges here. So I always bring this scale down, and you can see it has changed and made it a little smoother. And then once you've got your threshold where you're happy, and in almost every scenario I found, just bring the scale down to the bottom and you'll get the best results. But I think there's been one occasion where I had it at like 7. So usually plan on having this just bottomed out. And then we're going to choose Trace this first time. And you'll see now that we've got some red lines, our cut lines that have appeared. And we can move our little JPEG image out of the way so we can see what we have. And now, despite it being a fairly fuzzy and not great photo, we now have a decent trace. And if we select our trace, we now have this whole thing selected. So the eyes and everything is all part of one. So if we choose a color, we'll see that everything is changed, just like it was here, that the outline part that we have traced is exactly what we have cloned over here. The difference is this image, being a JPEG, the larger you make it, the blurrier and blurry it gets. This one isn't going to get any more blurry, if you will, than it started. We can keep making this larger and larger, and it's not going to degrade. So if you wanted to print this as a huge image, like for the side of a car or something, you can take this up as big as you want, and the quality isn't going to go any lower. A couple things with the traced images. You can see this is definitely not perfect. There's some flaws in the stars especially. The rest of it actually looks pretty good. But if we double click, you'll see all of our points. Like we talked about before on the side here, you can also just choose this icon here. But I like double clicking because I'm already working in this space. It's very easy to quickly do so. Depending on your computer specs, this is a lot of points. I'm on a high-end gaming computer, so I don't get any kind of slowdown really. But if you're on a computer that's just good enough, you may start to slow down when you're dealing with something with this many points. So it won't be quite as accurate of a trace as far as size and scale go, but there is this simplify option, which if your computer is struggling at this point, could be a good thing to use. If you click simplify, you'll see most of the points have gone away, and it has done exactly that. It has simplified our trace to what the software kind of deems is the minimum amount to make this image, which I'm going to shrink down a bit. It's kind of huge. There we go. So let's see that basically nothing has really changed in our design by taking all those extra points out. So I tend to simplify almost every time, unless I'm going to be stacking parts of the image together. Say I'm making this bow in vinyl. If I simplify this, some of the edges might move just a little bit, just because there is so much less data in those points. So if I simplified this outline and then simplified a sketch of the bow, they may not fit together in real life in their vinyl form. So for that, I would not choose simplify, just so you get an exact, basically, copy of this original image. But normally, simplify is a great thing to do. And then you can come in and you can clean it up a little bit if you want. I'm not going to spend much time doing so, but show you what I mean. And that way, if your project calls for it, you could make it look as nice or as original as you want. So you can see, like right here, especially these stars have some little humps and bumps in them, which obviously the real Subaru logo would not have. So if we do that double click, you can see we've got a couple of points surrounding our weird little hump. And if you click on one, and we'll zoom in on it so we can see a little more clearly. Anytime there's a curve, you'll see these two little blue handles associated with the point that is selected. So if I click this point, you'll see the handles again associated with that. And that determines where the curve from this point is going. So if I take this one and move it, you'll see that the handles move together, which is usually the case. Sometimes in traces, they do a little bit weird. But usually you're going to get both of them to move together, but you can choose how far out or how close one side is, and it doesn't affect the location of the other. But as far as rotation is concerned, they will move as a unit. You can also move the point itself, depending on the effect that you want. So you can clean things up a little bit. You can see it's now much smoother. And you can also potentially just delete a point. If sometimes there's too much going on, you might have 3 or 4 points in this little area, you're going to get some slight waviness between them. So I could just delete this middle point and then adjust my angle, or my curve, to be the shape that I'm looking for. That way you get that smooth transition, and being that there's only one point in this whole section now, it's a lot easier to get a smooth, clean line. And same thing on this side. If we come over here, so there's not many points, so something between these 3 points must be a little bit strange. And you can see this handle has passed this point. And usually you don't want that. So I bring this one back in. And so yeah, the two handles between these two have passed one another. And so you're getting kind of a pinching. So you can bring this back to this side, bring this back to this side, and you'll see that's already cleaned it up quite a bit. And again, if you wanted to adjust angles or position, or again, potentially completely delete that one, you could always change your other points and get a cleaner look. So that's enough cleanup. Obviously, there's other humps and bumps and things that are not great if you were trying to get a professional looking finish. But using that exact same technique, you could clean up something like the bump right here, which is a little bit high and the curves are wrong and things. So you could manipulate those to your heart's content. And the higher quality your original image is, the less of this bumpy cleanup that will be needed. If you've got a high-res image, which this is not, I think it was 160 by 160 pixels, very small. It was like a thumbnail on a forum page. So a pretty terrible photo, but that was one thing I was specifically asked, is how do you do a trace when your example or your reference photo is low quality? And this is the best way I have found, is to, again, make sure you have your scale at the bottom. Really fine-tune your threshold. I found like the difference of 1 or 2% can kind of make or break a trace. So zoom in and look at some of these little tighter areas that might not make it look as good. And just really make sure to pick a setting or a percentage that makes your image look as good as possible. And then if you want a great-looking image, then go back and clean up some of these little bumps and imperfections. So let's move him aside for now, or her. Let's move it. It's a drawing, that's what it is. We'll move it to the side, and we'll talk about some of the other options that we have. Let's do the Trace and Detach feature next. We'll skip Outer Edge for a moment, and let's use this little assortment of Japanese-inspired, I think they were temporary tattoos, is what I had found. And you can see, again, these are not good quality images. You can see all the blurriness kind of here around the edge of the flower and the edge of the sun, where it looks very pixelated. They are very low quality images. Again, I wasn't using these for projects, they're just example pieces, so their overall quality is not all that relevant. But again, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to select the trace area. If you happen to have closed this or lost it or anything, remember it's just our little trace button here. Select our trace area and do the same thing. Let's use this little one here. You'll see again it has selected an area to be traced. Bring my scale down like we did last time. Sometimes it's more of an effect than other times. I like to zoom in a little bit so I can see some of the details. And again, we've got a lot of out of focus kind of gray tones on the ends here. You can see this one's almost completely missed. There's just a little yellow dot right there. And then all of our points are hazy. This one's got a gap. It's not connected. So we want to bring that threshold up to the point that we're satisfied with the amount of coverage for our trace. And again, as we bring this up, we might get a better point here, but you'll also see over here, it's so much we've lost all of our details. If we bring it down and compare, there are multiple little spikes in our drawing right here that get lost as you bring this up too high. So that's why I said it's kind of a balancing act of how much detail do you want to keep versus how much are you willing to lose to benefit other parts of the drawing. I keep saying drawing, but image, whatever. So we've got this. I'm pretty happy with where it's set up. If we choose Trace and Detach, this is going to be a very common thing for you to do if you get into the world of doing stickers, is if you look at the moment, it looks like nothing has actually changed. But when we pull this down, we have detached at our trace mark this image. And so it is still a colored image, as you'll see, unlike our trace of Hello Kitty up above. But the biggest thing to keep in mind here is that Hello Kitty is a fully completed object. So you'll see here, everything is going to be cut out if you send this to your Cameo or Cricut or whatever product you're using. All of these details will be cut out of cardstock, vinyl, whatnot. However, if you bring in our image here, it is colored. So if you're doing something like I said with stickers, this is super common because you're usually going to want a colored image for your sticker. You can print the colored portion, and then your actual cut line is just the outline. So that's an important difference, is you're not going to be cutting all these petals if you use the Trace and Detach feature. If we used the standard trace, do it just to compare. I did click it. I didn't think I did. Close. Trace. Do our standard trace. I'm not going to adjust all these. We saw how that was done. Now you'll see there's a lot more red because now it's making every trace line that we just did into a cut line. So all of these little details, including this little dot, this little line, all of this would be attempted to be cut. So depending on your project, make sure that you're picking the appropriate one. That way you get the outline like Hello Kitty. That would make the most sense. This one being what it is in the complexity, most likely you'd want more like the Trace and Detach, where we're getting the colored image but only cutting the outside. As you can see this one, if we fill it in this case the drawing was red on the sun and our lines were black. This one, it's all currently one image. So I can make the sun the red color, but then our flowers the red color as well. This is all one image at the moment. Which leads into a way that we can manipulate colors, which has been a very common question. We'll do the last one first. We'll do the outer edge, then we'll do the colors. So let's use Gunther here. A little penguin Gunther. And if we again choose Select Trace Area, we select Gunther. And we're going to do the outer edge, which is going to make it so that even though the eyes, the nose, everything is currently highlighted like it will be traced, if we choose the outer edge, you can see with this little kind of butterfly-ish image, and these will give you an indication, just like the Trace and Detach did, that it's just that outside line. So these inner parts, like the eye, they're all within this outer kind of silhouette, which again is handy for things like stickers. If we choose Trace Outer Edge, you already have the colored image, same with this one, as if we were going to cut it like a sticker, like we did originally with the Detach. Gunther here now has just a outside line. None of the details, none of the wing, the eyes, any of that is in our trace because this is strictly the outer edge of our traced area. So this is when it's especially important that when you do your trace area that you don't miss anything, because if I do something like this and choose outer edge, obviously the outer edge did not include all of him. It's good to always select everything anyway, but this is an example where it's more of a potential problem if you didn't select everything that you had intended. All right, and then the last piece, let me get these outer edges out of the way, get rid of Gunther too, is I get a lot of questions about colors, which we're going to do two different ways. One using the premium features with the trace by color, and then one with kind of a workaround that I actually use more often. I have trace by color right here. It's super powerful as far as the tool is concerned. I use it all the time, but I have a workaround that I almost probably use more often, which is handy for people who have the free version. So if we again do our trace, just like we have been doing, there he goes. You'll see right now our threshold is high enough that his little dinosaur claws, little mouths, were red. If we bring this down, so even though it's usually selecting black or the darkest tones, the default had the little heads selected as well. So you want to keep an eye on stuff like that. As I lose all the detail for his eye and everything, if it just selects it all. So make sure to come down low enough that you're not losing all the details here. We just want the main black outline, which is very common of any kind of like comic or cartoon characters. That you're going to have a black outline around kind of everything, and then your colors within that. Oh, I went too far. Got pixelation. Maybe right there. That looks pretty good. Again, we'll bring our scale down. That'll clean it up a little bit also. And then for this, we're just going to do a trace. We're going to add our own colors. This is my workaround method that I had mentioned. We're going to move him because we might use him again in a moment here. So we now have this, which we can select and choose our outline color, just like we've been doing. I'll tell you right now, though, this one I traced the I Am Unstoppable as well, just to trace the whole area. I do not use traced text. It never seems to work quite right, for a couple of reasons. One is, again, it has a lot of points. I mean, just this eye, which is basically a straight line, you can see has point after point after point to create what is ultimately a very simple shape. So you can either do a lot of cleanup and delete all of these points in the middle, so we have this one on the end connect to this one on the end, and make a nice straight clean cut. Otherwise, if you send this to your cutter, it's going to try to connect every single one of these points. And you can see down here, there's a cluster of, I think that's 3. And so your cutters, instead of just making a straight cut, is going to do this like jagged, like grind, which I've seen asked in the groups and things quite a bit as to why their cutter is grinding or seems to go especially slow. Is just trying to hit every single one of these points, which on this image, if this is a 12 by 12 mat, this whole image is like roughly 6 inches tall. So like a 1-inch letter is going to try to hit 6 or 7, 8 points on this one eye, and there were even more on this A. I mean, there's so many. So you're going to get a mess. One option, again, is to choose Simplify. But when you simplify, text sometimes does some weird things. That you might get some weird shapes. Where's our original image? If we can compare. It's not much different, but depending on how accurate you're trying to be, this point on the S is super sharp, like a 90-degree point, as we're down here, it's more opened up. Same with the top part here. It's got a point to the end, and this one is definitely curved. Like I said, some areas are affected worse than others. This one actually didn't transfer too bad being a block text. The S seems to be the most noticeable, at least at a quick glance. But if you're trying to basically copy this, obviously simplifying it has ruined some of the details. And even still, there's a fair number of points. I mean, just this D shape in the middle of the P has, looks like 2, 4, either 6 or 7 points just for, in essence, a half circle. So it's still kind of unnecessarily complicated. So I would generally delete the text entirely and add my own text. You can pick whatever font you like at that point. You can change the wording if maybe you don't want all of this. Maybe you could just say unstoppable. Maybe you don't want the text at all. So I usually get rid of the text regardless, and I can go from there. So you can do it a couple of ways. You can bring it into our edit points. And if you hold shift, you can then drag and select any points that are in this edit mode, and I can just delete. The other option, if you want to manipulate individual parts, I'm not going to do it at this point to add extra confusion, but for people who are curious, if you right-click, first you have to select what you're clicking on, and right-click, you can release the compound path, and that'll make every single individual piece, all of these little flares, the I, the A, the M, each individual dot will all be their own manipulated piece. So if you wanted, you could take this one dot and move it down or space them out. I don't want to get that complicated in this, so I'm just going to, again, continue selecting and delete what we don't want, because text makes a mess when you trace. So here we're working with this. And we can add color, either the color that's in our original image if we want, or we can pick and choose our own. So you can do this a few different ways. What I tend to do is to fill in what I want by drawing over the traced area. Let me show you what I mean by that. It's if we take our line tool, and we're going to use the sharp corners so we don't color outside of the lines. Zoom in where we can get in close, and just click and draw over the area that we want. You can go relatively quickly, because we don't have to be very accurate, as long as you're inside of your black outline. That's all that we need. Something like that. We can then add the color that we want. Maybe we want to go red, just like the original image. And then you're going to take the piece we've just drawn that looks terrible because it's on top, and on the top here, move it to the back. So we've got this one here, we'll move it to the back. And now we've colored in the top portion of our dinosaur head. It's choppy and ugly underneath, but you can't see it anymore. And then this piece here, if we want to, again, make it like the original drawing, was white. And if you are trying to reference your photo, you can always zoom out and take a look, or maybe you have it on a different screen. But his little jaw connection piece right here was white. You can make it black or whatever you want. But again, we're going to try to replicate the image. So you can do this a couple ways. I usually just stick with the little line tool here, because you can still pretty quickly snap around versus trying to do like an oval shape. That's all we need as far as detail is concerned. Again, it's kind of ugly, and that's all right. We can send it to the back. And right now it's at the back, so it's behind the red. We want it just one layer up. And so this guy here will bring it one layer up, which has brought it in front of the red, but still behind our black outline. And now we have the top half of our little dinosaur head filled in. You can do the same thing with the bottom. Let's do that and quickly fill this in. You only need as many points as it takes, just like when we did the simplify. More points, you can be more accurate, but it's not necessarily needed, especially for something like this. I can do this whole stretch in one click, and this whole stretch, as long as it doesn't go outside of your black line, so you don't get overlaps and weird edges. And maybe, because we want it to be a little bit different than the drawing, maybe this red and this red aren't the same. Maybe this is a darker tone. So we can choose from our colors here. And maybe we realize there's not a good red. There's really not, if we want it to be different, because that's the darkest red, and it's the same red we just used. So I'm going to come over, select it, to this side, to our little color palette here, our fill panel. And here we have full control over the color. So we can even use the same color spectrum and just change the intensity of the color. Or you can actually manipulate the color, just like a traditional kind of color wheel. Maybe I want a little bit deeper tone, more like a burgundy kind of red. And then again, we need to move it to the back, which is at the top here in the middle. Something like that. So now it's unique from the original image, but we're still adding color, which could then be print and cut if we want. We would do the same thing here. These actually might be the same size. Let's find out. Control, do a copy on that. I'm curious. I wasn't going to do them again, but if it'll fill the space, almost. close enough for comparison's sake. We're putting it back there. And we'll copy that. I was going to just go with it, but if I can do it quick and easy, send it to the back, up a layer. It's obviously not perfect. If you were doing it, I would draw it again, but I'm not using this for any kind of specific project. We'll bring him over, use the green tool to rotate. Didn't quite rotate it enough. It's good enough because it's not going to be a perfect match. And we can have something to that extent. You can see his little claw arms are white. Again, you could do the same thing if you wanted them to be like a gray or like look like they're metal, maybe do like a silver color. You could do the same thing, is connect your dots to complete this shape, and then choose one of these silver colors. And again, you could manipulate the tone if you wanted more of a blue silver or whatever at that point, and have the same effect here. Obviously, it'll take a little bit longer, but you could also do the whole the same thing for the whole dinosaur, where you're doing again all the points. Normally, I would zoom in and be accurate, but just to be quick for the video, because this is going on long enough, we'll just quickly do a vague rough outline just so we can see what would happen. I would have done his feet and stuff too, but just going good enough. We'll give him kind of a, oops, I have to select my piece. Give him kind of a dinosaur green color. We'll send it to the back. And you would have something like this. Again, I wouldn't have colored outside the lines, and I would have got his feet in it, but I don't want this to go on forever. And then you can have your color without doing trace by color. You would then have your fully colored image. You could color in his little fingers green, just like they are over here. You could also add details. Maybe on the belly here, you don't want it to be green. You want more like that snake underbelly shape. You could do the same thing. Obviously, this one would have to be a little more precise, but you could draw out more of the shape like the little underbelly pieces often have, something to this extent. And you could make these, a different tone. They could be kind of an orangey yellow color. Something like that. And you could bring these down, maybe make each one a little bit darker in tone, so it's going down into the shadows, and make your own image out of what was already an image that you found as reference material. So this is kind of my workaround method for adding color, because to trace this, it's tracing the black, that even if we go through with our trace tool, select some of that, you can't ever really get it to where it traces the green unless it's tracing everything, which if it is, and we choose trace, you end up with just, in essence, the outline, similar to if we did trace outer edge. All the details inside his little hand and everything have been lost. So yes, you could potentially make this green, but at that point you've lost your outline, which would have been here. So yeah, unfortunately, you can select now what was the outline is green on his little handles. You've lost the dinosaur heads to the green. So getting the green portion, if you don't have trace by color, is hard to impossible depending on the image. So this is a workaround method that I actually use more because I like a little more personalization with things like the belly stripes or the two-tone here that I did, that you can play with it more and get it exactly the way that you want. And then I won't spend a lot of time since it is a premium feature, but I did want to mention the trace by color because it is asked about and it is the recommendation as a fix in the chat groups and things a lot. So wanting to show exactly how this works. So that way if you do have a premium version or you're debating it, this can help see kind of what it can do. So with this one, instead of drawing a box, you're going to select a spot on your image, which it's using to determine the color that it's going to trace. Like the eyedropper tools, if you used a lot of other software, it's taking that as a reference color and going to trace that color. And right now it's only traced this tiny little bit of yellow. And that's because if you've done anything like Paint, as simple as like Microsoft Paint, these are all slightly different tones of red. So like when you use your paint bucket and it fills in, like 3 pixels, that's what it's done here. It's only going to trace these 3 little pixels. So we want to choose all areas instead of the single area. And you'll see now everything of that red has been selected. And then again, we have our tolerance here, which was like the threshold before. which is how far off of that color it's going to, or we're going to choose it to trace. So you can see if I go up high enough, it's now outlining parts that are in black. And if you go all the way up, you've lost the whole image. So again, it's a slight balancing act, but with the colors, it's a lot easier because it's only really looking for the red. So we could trace this, or you could trace and detach depending on which effect you're going for. And this would do exactly the same thing. We would pull off the red pieces. I'm just going to trace it. Trace it, if I could talk. There we go. And now you'll see our little dinosaur heads are here. We can select them and choose our color. And you'll see now we have the red of those. We could then do trace by color and choose the green. It'll think for a second. And that one green tone you can see is missing quite a bit. So we can choose all areas, which cleaned it up more. And then we can bring that tolerance up to further fill in. I'm looking at like his fingers here, which are missing some details. Just trying to get as much as I can without blowing out into the black. Let me back out just a little bit and double check. That looks pretty good to me. So we can trace. It'll think for a moment. Normally it's almost instant, but while I'm doing the video recording, it's a little slow. My computer's handling more than it could. And so I noticed there's some red here, which happens sometimes, depending on what you're tracing and how high that tolerance is. That's something, where is he, based on here? Looks like it might have been around the teeth on this little dinosaur head have been picked up. So we've got some ugliness here. So we can, again, choose our edit points or double click, and then just shift select this little mess and delete it. Now we don't have all that little unnecessary clutter. And you can see the same thing kind of here in the middle, that there's a little bit of cleanup needed. It wasn't perfect because I wanted to get the detail in these fingers. So again, if we double click, you can see there's some unnecessary stuff here. You can shift and select, or if you're getting into tight quarters, maybe you don't want to try to shift select all this and delete his arms, you can just select and click delete. If they're linked, you can click delete multiple times and get rid of the whole area at once, but a lot of these are like random 1 points, so you can clean it up a little bit like so. And we can give our dinosaur the green color, kind of like the green color that we chose, something like that. We can line up his little dinosaur head. He was kind of like so. You can see the green in here is the real dinosaur's head behind the little toy dinosaur. So it's something like so. And then we have our normal trace, which was just black. You can either do the trace by color and select black, or we can do the trace the normal way, which selects the black on its own. But I'm going to do trace by color and choose black. Excuse me. You can see that's a bigger selection, but definitely not enough. So all areas. Bring up our tolerance. That was a pretty good jump. That actually worked out pretty nice. I want to write about... Oh, we got some details missing over in the little toy dinosaur over here. So let's bring that up more. Getting close. Oh, you can see I've actually selected too much that I'm over into the little tattoo drawing. So I'm actually going to unselect for a second. Let me cancel out of that. Where's my little X? Back myself up. Hope I got a little bit of a lag. There we go. Let's get this out of the way. Oh, come on, little lag, you can do it. There we go. Close out my little trace by color for a second. There we go. I forgot that he was overlapping things. I don't want to make a mess of it. So trace by color and the black. That's probably part of why I was lagging too, because I was trying to get multiple images all at once. Get this up, try to get where we're close. I'm not worried about what the text looks like, because again, we're not using that for this example. Mostly concerned about the little details around the toy dinosaurs. I see there's still some missing here at the little joint of the jaw. So bring that up a little bit. Trying to get that filled in. I see it's bringing up some garbage on this side because it's black in the shadows. So I don't want to go too high that I make this big mess. But if I can get it close, I can always clean up, like there's a dot right here, and this line can be fixed relatively easy. So that's close enough for me. Give it a trace. It takes a second to process the color. Get our image out of the way. And then I can shift, select all of this, and delete. We can shift, select all of this, and this. So we got rid of our text. Depending on, again, the computer and whatnot, you could simplify this, but since we're going to stack it, I try not to, just so this outline is as accurate to this original drawing as possible, but it'll still be close if you need to simplify it. So if you were to bring this over and line everything up, they probably won't be perfect at first. Let's get this one first. We'll put him in the middle. See, I also picked up some extras up here. So if you made this mistake like I did, you can always select and delete the garbage that you have picked up by mistake. Get rid of all this junk. There we go. And get the pieces lined up. And you can also fine-tune with the keyboard where it goes 1 pixel at a time, just by pushing whichever direction you want them to go. So if you get it close, you can always move it as need be. That's actually pretty much right there. You can always zoom in if you need to double check an edge. Like there's a little gap here at the top, so I'm obviously too low. And this is why doing the trace isn't perfect, because that tolerance each time is just a little bit off. So while it's much quicker than having to go in and draw it all manually, and it looks good from any kind of distance, the closer you get, you can see there's a couple little flaws. The one here at the top, the jaw didn't quite pick up. So which is why I use the workaround option that we did for this dinosaur actually more frequently, because I can ensure that he is completely filled in. The little dinosaur claws are completely filled the way that I want. You can manipulate the color. If you decide you hate them in red, you get them done, you don't like them, you can just select your little claw and just choose a new color. So you could have blue ones, you could have a mismatch. If you wanted them one red and one blue, you could choose the bottom half to be a different tone of blue, or be it purple or whatever. It gives you a lot more customization and freedom versus trying to do the trace by color. So it depends. With something like these, where it's just red and black, trace by color comes in pretty handy. But even this design, which is only 3 colors, this kind of medium red, the green, and the black, there's still some problems that arise using trace by color. So it is very handy, but has its limitations. And you can do the same thing that we did here, even if your reference obviously has no color, because you're picking and choosing. So if you wanted Hello Kitty, for example, to have a colored bow, you could do the same thing. You can either draw a shape inside of your outline. Oops, which it jumped on me because I'm zoomed out too far. So, oops, I'm still selected on my tool. Go to my tool there so I can double click. And you can click and add a point and then move the point over. Since I messed up. And we'll make it like a kind of a pink color. That's kind of pink. There we go. And move it to the back. And so you could do something like that to add color. You could, if the whole thing was going to be the same color, you could just do the main outline, the most outside part of whatever color you're working on. So if we want all the details of the bow to be the same, you could just go out here, choose our color, and move it to the back. So you can add color to what was another otherwise black and white image. And again, if you decide you don't like that color, you could change it, make it red. It happens I have the pink piece on top, so you could change that if you wanted to. It could be a different red, it could be pink, blue, purple, doesn't matter. And manipulate it to your heart's content. You could add the face color, you could do whatever you want, because you're now in control of this image. You can also, as I mentioned earlier, kind of finish with this, is you can right click and you can release the compound path, which you can see has filled it all in as far as what it looks like at a glance. But what this has done is make each of these pieces their own. So I can now move individual parts of the image. Undo it so they go back where they're supposed to be. And we could subtract or change the colors from here. So we could choose the face. You could choose white. Maybe the bow. I'm going to hold shift and select multiple. If I can get that little one. There we go. And maybe we'll make it kind of a pink-purple color. The ear would have been white. The little feet will shift and select, would be probably a white. I don't have a reference photo, I'm just going off memory. And then here you can see a couple of things will happen. Is if I choose the stars, which I think are usually gold, it's going to screw up our outline because there's no separation right here. So if we choose like a gold color, now our outline looks kind of ridiculous. So there's a limitation of doing the release path option. It's obviously this was much quicker than trying to draw in all the points and change the color. This is now a completed piece. But in a case like this where what would be gold and would be black, there's nothing dividing them, you would need to get more creative. And you could do that and kind of combine the methods where you could do the outline, continue this outline across in black. Or you could do a separate trace of this shape, like make a copy and manipulate this one the way that you want it. Like I could delete all these extra points, which takes me just a moment, something like there. Delete these other points. So you could have something like this. Again, like before, we would want to clean up this weird edge that I just created because you've got pieces going weird directions because it wasn't the way that it was intended. So even if it was something like that, and then we put this piece back, something like there. Again, it's not perfect. It'd be better if I was taking my time for a project. Oops, I did not click on it. Make it a blue color. And then you can move that back as far as you need to go. There's going to be a lot of stuff. I'm going to go to the background and then bring it forward. There's a lot of stuff on my screen. Oh, maybe it's too far back now, too. Just all the dinosaurs and stuff are all layers in this project. So we have so much going on. Let's get rid of all of this. Problem is now I've lost that piece back there. Bring this back. I normally wouldn't have like 8 different projects going at the same time. That's good enough for this. And then bring that guy forward. Where are you at, blue? Because it goes through each layer. I'm going to bring him to the front. See if it's faster this way. Bring it back. They were behind the star. I mean, the other stars. Where are the other? Oh, I can't because they're, again, linked. So I could do the gold color that way. Let's make it gold. I was thinking the circle shape. So let's go gold. I had it in my head backwards. And then we could select these little stars and choose the same gold. And these little stars and choose the gold. And then this piece here could be our blue. So we could do something like that. And again, I could clean this up, the piece that I made, clean it up a little bit more with the black so we get our defined outline. But now the outline of the Hello Kitty drawing going over the Subaru logo is much more convincing. So releasing the path gives you the ability to control and manipulate the colors. So this may be a faster or easier way for you to go about it. And generally, if you don't have these overlapping bits like I did, it's way faster. Like we did the whole head in a matter of like 6 clicks. So that's kind of where that one's at. And then when you're all said and done, you've got all these pieces. You could go up to the top here and group them together. That way when you move it, you're not moving just the face or just the bow separately so you don't mess it up. You could scale it down to whatever sticker size or whatnot you were doing and then send it to your cutter. So I think with that, it was a little longer than I wanted, but got everything covered in the different types of tracing, with trace, the outer edge, and then the detaching feature. Touched on the trace by color just a little bit. And if you want to play around with the magnet trace, be my guest. I personally hate it. I've never actually used it. I've only played with it, but either I'm missing something or this feature to me is kind of a waste of time. But the trace by color is very powerful depending on your project. And obviously the regular trace is a very powerful tool. Just make sure if your image is coming out extra blurry to bring this scale down and make the threshold selected, it's going to be different from every project, so there is no standard. But if it's black and white, usually anywhere in the middle is pretty close, and then manipulate from there as you get a more complicated image. So with that, I'm going to end today's video. Appreciate you stopping by and checking out the video today. If you have any questions or need further clarification, just like always, let me know either through Facebook or on the comment section down below. And any further likes and subscribes are appreciated, and we'll see you again on the next one.